Hello everyone. So friend, let's see the demonstration of how we can create dynamic tests and execute it in JUnit 5. So in our test folder, here I will be creating one test class. Let's say I give a name to test, dynamic test demo, and I keep it in a package. Dynamic test. We'll click finish. So friends, here first we'll create a simple dynamic test, and what we'll do, in our source folder we had written one class string helper. So as we already discussed what this reverse method does, it takes in an input string and it reverses the input string and finally returns us back the reversed string. So here we will be testing this reverse method. So friend, in order to create a dynamic test which are generated during runtime, the annotation we use is @test factory, and it is placed on the top of the factory method, which cannot be private or static. So we keep it as public. And we also discuss the return type of this test factory method should be of type either a single dynamic node or a collection of dynamic nodes. So let's say we give the name of test method as test reverse. We'll import dynamic node from org.junit.jupyter.api package, and we'll import @test factory annotation from org.junit.jupyter.api. So friend, as we know that dynamic node is parent to dynamic test class, so therefore we usually don't return dynamic node. What we do is we simply return dynamic test, which is a child to dynamic node. So how we can create a dynamic test? So if we see, the dynamic test has a method dynamic test which takes in a display name and an executable, which we already discussed in our previous slide. So what we do here is, let's say we provide the display name as dynamic test for reverse method, and inside the executable we know that we need to provide a piece of code which will basically assert or test what we actually want to test. So here, as this is a functional interface, so here we have provided a lambda expression, and inside that we provide, let's say, assert equals, and let's say we want to test the reverse method of string helper class. So here what we do is we simply create an instance of string helper, we call string helper reverse method, and let's say we pass a string as, let's say, dog. So when we do the reverse of dog, we get God. So here we provide the expectation as, and this would be our actual return value. So we'll import the assert equals from assertions package, and when we create this dynamic test, finally we need to return like this. And here you can see dynamic test has static method dynamic test. So we can also provide the static imports. Copy this. And we can simply write it like this. So friend, as per the definition, the dynamic tests are created during runtime. So here we have created one dynamic test. So for timing it doesn't look like a runtime test, because if we want to test something else we need to modify this test. So just for the demonstration purpose, I have just created a simple dynamic test. If I run the test reverse test factory method, so here you can see in dynamic test demo class it ran test reverse with one single dynamic test whose display name is dynamic test for reverse method, and whatever the assertion we provide, it got passed. So friend, this is a basic syntax of creating a dynamic test. And we also discussed that return type should be of dynamic node or dynamic test. So what happens if we provide a different return type? Let's say here I provide a return type of string, and here instead of dynamic test, let's say I simply return as so here if we run the dynamic test demo class, when it tried to run test reverse with string, it gave an exception which is JUnit exception, saying at the test factory method the test name must return a single dynamic node or a stream collection iterable iterator or array of awk.junit.jupyter.api.dynamic node. So friend, this is what we discussed in our previous slide, that when we create a dynamic test, the return type of it must be dynamic node or a collection of dynamic nodes, and we can also return its child type, which is nothing but dynamic test. So friend, here we saw a basic example of dynamic test. So here currently this is not a proper dynamic test. In our upcoming lecture we'll see that how we can create a proper dynamic test, and we'll also see the demonstration of dynamic test which returns a collection, iterable, array, stream of dynamic test. I hope you like this video. Thanks, have a nice day.